Hello and welcome to Photoshop CC 2018 Creation Number 1 by Larry Mathewson. After loading our basic drawing, we'll create a duplicate layer by dragging it down to the Create New Layer icon at the bottom. We can also accomplish this with a shortcut keystroke, Control J. Now we're going to go to the upper layer to Filters and Mezzotint. You can set the image to any of these standards. However, I prefer the medium lines. All this does is break the drawing up such that we can apply other filters to it, which create quite a nice, pleasing result. Now we'll go back to Filter, Blur, and Radial Blur. Select 100%, Zoom, and Best Quality. This creates a beautiful effect. This filter can be provided 2 or 3 times because once it's taken once, it moves to the top of the filters stack, and with Control F you can effectively do the same treatment again and again. This further dilutes the image, makes it look more pleasing. After that, if we want to make further changes, we can go to Adjustments, select Brightness and Contrast. This is the personal adjustment, different for each person. Next, we might go to Vibrance and up to Vibrance and Saturation. Testing with the slider up and down makes for a good result. Now we'll go back to Filter and Distort and use the traditional twirl. Go to the settings box, and I like to use 250 as the twirl type. You can go anywhere between 0 and 360 degrees. And as per the other filter, it now goes to the top, and with Control F or selecting it, you can apply 250 degrees once more. I like this setting, so I'm now going to go and duplicate that layer, but it now needs to be reversed. So I'll click on the corner of the selection, and if you see the top change, you have a whole bunch more options. I'm going to go to the width parameter and put a minus in front of that, which will flip the layer 180 degrees horizontal. I'm now going to accept the change that I've made, go back to Image, and do similar adjustments, but I'm going to go to Hue and Saturation in this perspective, so I can change the colors on this layer, because we don't want it the same color as the layer below, which you will see in a moment the reason why. Once I've selected that, I'm now going to go to that layer in the Layers panel, go to Opacity, and reduce the opacity such that I can see the underlying layer, generally around 50%, more or less depending on the colors you've chosen. Again, it's a personal choice. I will now select both of those layers by Shift left mouse click, and then I will Control J or drag the two down to duplicate it, because I may want to save the two original layers just the way they were. I will go to the layers and join them together to make a combination of the two layers. I will now go to the Layers panel and create a transparent layer going to the bottom, transparent layer creator, and fill it with the default black color at the moment using alternate plus backspace. I'm now going to the upper layer and I'm going to do a selection of the upper layer. If I hold my Shift and Alt key, place in the center, I'll produce a circle that radiates out from the center of the image until I let go of my left mouse button. Once I'm happy with my selection and release my left mouse button, I will go over to the layer and create with Control J a new selection using a new layer using that selection. I'm now going back and I'm selecting a square or rectangle by holding my Shift key and dragging my mouse across the layer, the original layer. Once I'm happy with that, I can create a second layer with Control J again, and you see I have both layers with a circle and a rectangle. I'll deselect the rectangle, go to the circular layer, and duplicate it by dragging it down to the bottom. This layer is actually on a transparent layer, so I can apply all the filters to this selection. If I go to the top and select the free transform tool, you can see I have custom settings. I can also manually adjust it. So this time I'm going to select the fish shape. Like the look of that. So either by tapping the check mark or going down to the tool to apply, I now have a different shape. I'll go back and select it again, create a smaller image with Shift and Alt being held at the same time, so I don't change the dimensions horizontal or vertical. And I will go back and create another free transform arrangement by modifying my existing image. This free transform tool in the 2018 edition of CC gives a lot more flexibility than the earlier version did. Now that I have the shape that I think I would like to work with, I'm going to free transform again, modify another part of the image. Sometimes when you overly stretch the image, it will become somewhat pixelated, so take care when you modify this. I'm now going to just hover off the corner until I get the rotate mark and rotate the image layer to the vertical position, move it over slightly to the left, and accept the location. Now I'm going to my actions. I've previously created an action that combines rotating and reducing the image on various layers. So I will reduce each layer 10% and rotate it 15 degrees just by operating this action. This makes a lot of different work very simple to do. So I'll make sure I'm on the correct layer. I'm going to duplicate it because I may want to save the original, and I'll just hit play repeatedly until I have the image in the shape that I would like to work with. This involves anywhere up to 30 different layers. Once that has been completed, I will close the Actions panel, select the top layer, slide down to the bottom layer, Shift click, and select all those layers and combine them with Control E, which is a shortcut for combining the layers. You can see I now have all those layers combined into a single layer. I'm going to duplicate it by dragging it to the bottom, or Control J would do the same. Select it. This time I'm going to the width parameter and I'm going to put a minus in front of the 100%, which flips it horizontally, and move it to a location that I'm happy with. Once I'm happy with the location, the crosshatch marks on CC 2018 allow you to place the images perfectly horizontally and vertically wherever you'd like to have them. It provides guidelines so that you get it right. Once I'm happy with that position, I will apply the change. I'm going to the bottom of the two layers, and with a Control click, left mouse click on that layer, I've now selected the component on that layer. I will now go to the top layer, and I'm going to erase at 50% just the intersection point. Hold the left mouse button down continuously. Do not let it up, because you'll apply 50% twice. What I want to do is I want to see through the top layer to the bottom layer with both at 50% visibility. Now that I'm happy with that, I'll go back, I'll deselect that selection on the layer, once again hitting Control D, combine those two layers and drag them down to duplicate them as a single element. So those two layers are now combined. I'm now going to select the layer, move it over to the center point so I can do further adjustments. I've now combined those layers, made a duplicate with Control J. I'm applying a filter which gives you a little different pattern on the top layer. Then I will apply radial blur once again. Once I have the radial blur positioned such that I like it, I will apply it one more time with either Control F or going up to the filters again and applying the radial blur. This just extends the blur further. And allows me to effectively do other things with it. I'm now duplicating that layer to give it a little more punch. When you duplicate the layers, it adds color. I'm going to combine them with Control E again. Select both layers with Shift left mouse click. I can now apply adjustments. After I apply the changes to that, I would apply adjustments of hue and saturation to let the layers better match the other layers that it's going to be combined with. I've now placed the upper layer that was radial blurred underneath the main layer that I was using, and applying hue and saturation to change and better match the colors front and back. So I'm working on the upper two layers here. Depending on which one you want on top, you drag one up or down. I'm now duplicating that top layer. And I'm going to use a 3D mesh in the form of a sphere. 3D allows me to size, place, rotate the design as though it were a ball, and position it wherever I would like on the layer. And you can see off to the right on the layers panel, you can see all the changes that took place as I applied the 3D filter. I'm now moving the lighting to front, and then I right mouse click, remove all the shadows so it doesn't lay on top of my other layers or reflect onto my other layers. I'm darkening it slightly. I accept all those changes. Now I'm duplicating that 3D layer with a Control J, which allows me to keep the original. And I'm now going to apply a rasterizing of that layer to flatten it out. So it still looks like a 3D layer, but in fact it's now a 2D layer. I will resize it holding Shift and Alt so that I don't change the parameters. It still stays perfectly round. I can move it up and down in the image using the center lines that are provided by 2018 CC Photoshop. Now that I have positioned it, I've duplicated it with a Control J, and I am going to resize this again, holding Alt and Shift, and place another copy of it on top of the image. I'll select those changes. As you can see, I've selected that image, that layer, and I've flipped it just like I did in previous layers. I'm now going to resize the entire canvas to a square. When this is done and accepted, the image will be smaller than the canvas. I now go to the image and trim it down to the size of the image, so the canvas matches the image. I just added another layer, a translucent layer, and I'm going to select a color. If I don't like the way I'm selecting the color from the palette, I can use the selection tool to go to the image itself and select a color. Accept that. That creates a foreground color that I will use Alt and Backspace to fill the translucent layer with the foreground color. I'm going to change it to a dissolve blend so you can see the effect here. There are many different things you can do with the blending modes in Photoshop. At any point along the way here, I am just adding additional layers to this image to try and make it look different. I'm now taking that pink layer with the dissolve parameter, going to pixelate, mezzotint, use the lines, to stretch the dot pattern. I will now go to blur, motion blur, and apply an angled blur, and you can modify the distance between the dots. It doesn't show well in dissolve, but if I go to another blend mode, normal, and then up the opacity, you can see the result. This is a personal thing. You can move it up or down and try different blend layers if you wish. So it may or may not add to the image. I'm just showing you various parameters that we can use here. Now if I take this layer, you can see all the previous layers still in place. They're just covered up by the black layer. If I take that layer and I duplicate it, Control J, and now I'll take that layer and select it and touch the corner and go up to the horizontal and put a minus in front of it, and what that gives me is a crosshatch effect with two layers. If I blend those two layers with opacity, you can see that I have somewhat of a crosshatch applied. So I can select both those layers at once and modify the opacity on both of them at the same time to see how it affects the overall on the image. And when I'm finished, if I use Control E to combine those two layers, I now have a single layer that looks like a crosshatch design in the background. Since the pink is a little bit strong, I want to modify it with Control U for hue and saturation until I'm happy with the results. I now selected that layer, and because I saw little distribution issues of that pattern at the corners, I'm upsizing the image just slightly so that the modifications on the corners don't really show. And now I'll just put all the layers back in place that I was working with for the final image. And I would like to add something to the image because I still have some space there. So some of the previous layers that I left intact, I go back, verify which one I like to modify, take it, duplicate it with Control J, touch the corner, go up to the width, put a minus in front of it, drag it across until the program tells me I'm at the right position, and apply the change. Every step of the way, all these little changes are very simple made, but they add tremendous quality to the image in the end. Of course, to finalize the image, I'm going to go to the top layer, a blank layer that I just made. I'm going to select a color from the image, select all, which is the top layer, go to Edit and Stroke, and place a 6-pixel stroke around the outside of the image, followed by Control D, and then I'm done. Thank you for watching.